Welcome back. We left, at least the last page you will have read, was about the different types of imperatives. Okay, now you've got a subjective maxim, which is merely your personal desire for doing something, which it takes on a rational form. You know, you can explain what you want to do. When it becomes subject to a rational structure, it turns from a maxim into an imperative. And the imperative can be of three different types. So they can be technical or problematical, which is, I'm thirsty, I want a drink, I shall go to the shops and buy one. Now, there is a law saying if you want X, you should do Y. Again, there's your general fundamental law at the bottom. There are pragmatical, assoterical ones, which Kant divides from the first one because these are the ones that Hume, Hobbes, the British empiricists would use, such as all human beings desire welfare or self-preservation or good health, therefore they should. Now, the point is, for Kant, they can't be moral laws because they're still empirical. They're based on scientific facts. And as we shall see in this little extract, that if you base them on those scientific facts, they must be based on prior laws of reason. Moral laws, or pure will, are duties. They involve practical necessity, and the law is of a universal kind such that you should X. And those will be moral imperatives. These moral imperatives are those generated by the moral law. We saw that, how is this to a large extent possible? What is the grounding principle of these categorical imperatives? Hypothetical imperatives have a ground in either taste and preference and desire, which is an independent statement. Pragmatic imperatives have a ground in naturalism, in descriptions of human nature and science. We're looking for the origin of morality. Kant has ruled those two out. So where is the origin of morality? Where is the independent grounding for moral imperatives, which are different from these other kinds? The answer is in autonomy, or freedom. Now, I will discuss this in depth afterwards, but implicit in Kant's reasoning is a refrain which will become more and more obvious. Desires are phenomenal. Their desires and preferences belong to an empirical world. They are scientific facts. They therefore obey the law of causality and the normal laws of nature. But these laws of nature and the laws of physics, as we know, are generated through the imposition of specific ways of thinking on reality. That's what his idealism has told us. As such, the phenomenal self is not free. It's it's grounded in this scientific view, and this scientific view is itself grounded in reason, or synthetic a priori judgments of a free public reason. The will in its activity is spontaneous and self-caused, and this is true at the basis of theoretical reason as it is in moral reason. The ends of activity, the purpose or the effect, cannot hold any moral worth from the phenomenal perspective. Because if we're using a scientific description of the agent, we are saying he or she is determined by causal law. If someone is determined by causal law, then they could not have acted otherwise. So the judgment of morality cannot apply. Any law which the will produced or the self produced must be represented to itself and then acted on upon a sense of duty. That's what we were talking about with practical reason prior to this. For such a law to be absolute, without limitation, unconditional, it has to be universalized. Here are a couple of quotes from the groundwork that make this clear. Now, An action from duty is to put aside entirely the influence of inclination, and with it every object of the will. Hence there is left for the will nothing that could determine it except objectively the law and subjectively pure respect for this practical law. And so the maxim of complying with such a law, even if it infringes upon all my inclinations. We get here the traditional view of Kant. Desires and preferences are inclinations, but when I act morally, I put them aside and act purely from reason. Why should I obey reason? Well, why shouldn't you? If you're a rational being, you are rational. It is not your nature, but there is a practical obligation to obey reason. It's the idea that when I write 2 + 2 equals, I am compelled to write 4. Okay? I have to complete it with a 4. There is a pull, if you like. And the only way I can refuse that, if I want to take advantage of someone in the examples I've given you, or if I want to make a point whilst I'm teaching, I do so with regret, these feelings. Okay? But these are not like normal feelings as such. And I do so at the cost of my rationality. Law thinking, or the structuring of law, governs all my formations of rational ideas. He goes on in the groundwork, the second quotation on the right, that it is an estimation of worth that far outweighs any worth of what is recommended by inclination, and that the necessity of my action from pure respect for the practical law is what constitutes duty, to which every other motive must give way, because it is the condition of a will good in itself, but the worth of which surpasses all else. So we've now come to a full understanding of what the good will and duty are. It is practical reason. What motivates me once I know that it would be immoral to lie? Okay, so let me think up an example. Here you are. We've bought a lottery ticket together. This is one I use. We win £50 million. I've got the ticket. You've got no TV. You can't check. You ask me, have we won on Saturday? My self-interest there is to lie. I want that 50 million. No, we didn't win a penny. I will keep the ticket for myself. I will keep the winnings for myself. Why don't I? Well, it's not because I'm your friend. It's not because I care for you. It is not because I want people to think better of me. It is because I know it is the wrong thing to do, to tell you a lie. Okay, being a rational agent, everything else just disappears or pales into significance. Isn't this respect, or sometimes translated as reverence for a law, or just the idea, 2 + 2 equals, I've got to write 4, that pull of rationality, a feeling? Well, I've tried to present it in a way that it doesn't get presented as a feeling, if you like. But there is an idea that is a feeling, and Kant answers this in a long footnote in the groundwork, 400 to 401, where he states that the feeling is not in response to an object. Okay? Feelings generally arise through objects. Objects in the world cause us feelings of aversion, of desire, of repugnance. And it's a situation or a feeling or an intuition, something that is given to our consciousness that gives us this feeling, okay, in the phenomenal world. But what reverence or respect is it has no feeling. It is pure thinking, okay? And pure thinking and the formation of a law, it is the pull of the conscience or the starkness of a law facing us. I know it is right to do X, even if it does not benefit. I know it is right to tell you the truth, even though I will be £25 million poorer. This feeling is one only a rational being can experience, okay? And furthermore, it's only one that the pure will, rather than the holy will, can experience. Because the holy will, remember, will formulate the laws of reason and just obey them. They have no chance. But whereas we as human beings formulate the law, but we have that freedom to not obey it. Okay. What we get is the noumenal world, the intelligible world, the world of reason, calling and trumping the demands of the world of nature, the phenomenal world. As I've said, it's not a normal feeling, respect for a law, okay? Respect for a law makes it sound austere, as always with Kant, but what it is the idea that it pulls us, our understanding pulls us. And this is how, and this is a quotation from Practical Reason, where he brings this idea in the second critique, and this is how the genuine moral incentive of pure practical reason is constituted. So why is it I do what is right, even when it is not in my interest? That is the motivation to do what is right and not act according to my desires. People like Hume or the naturalists would say there's another stronger desire. Kant is not saying that. He's saying that there is a moral incentive of pure practical reason. The quotation: it is nothing other than the pure moral will law itself, insofar as it lets us discover the sublimity of our own supersensible existence. Okay, now what he means is that we feel awe in front of our own almost power over the formation of objects. Okay, it is the awareness that we are rational beings that construct rational order. And he continues, and subjectively affects respect for their higher vocation in human beings. So it is respect for myself as a rational being that I obey the law. That once I know I am rational, once I formulate rational law, I feel the pull or the need to be rational, because otherwise I would violate what I am. And these, although they sound like feelings, again with Kant, they are not feelings or emotions. They're higher vocation human beings, and to go back to the quotation, who are at the same time conscious of their sensible existence and of the dependence connected with it on their pathologically affected nature. So we are aware of ourselves as phenomenal selves, we are aware of ourselves as causal objects, because we have a body that exists in the world, and this body pushes and pulls us as other objects in the world do. But we can rise above this. And the rising above this is possible through the formation of thinking. His aim of a metaphysics, and this is a metaphysics of both theoretical reason but also metaphysics of morality, is to set up the conditional possibility of experience. Objects need to have a rational form to be experienced. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to make any statements about them, or we wouldn't to have knowledge about them. Objects, in a sense, are formed by the givenness of intuitions. We experience things that are given to us, or we experience what is given to us, whether it's singular or plural, we do not know. These intuitions give us object substance, and they can determine what has objective reality. So, for example, the formation of our reason will allow us to allow for the possibility of both horses and unicorns to exist. They are both possible objects of experience. Just to say what isn't, a square triangle is not a possible object of experience. It just couldn't exist because there is no way that that concept is rational. But there's nothing irrational about a horse or a unicorn. Okay? A square triangle is ruled out by reason. Horse and unicorn will be ruled out by intuitions that are given to us. Okay? Intuitions give substance to the impositions of our reason, and thus through that we can determine there is nothing that meets the requirement of unicorns in the world. Okay. When we use the categories and concepts of reasons, the conditional possibilities of experience, to discuss objects such as horses and unicorns, we can do so in a way that is intelligible. However, when we go beyond the limits of our reason, and remember this is what a dialectic does, it turns reason on itself and asks us what are the limits. So for example, if we wanted to discuss how many angels fit on the end of a pin, okay, and the trouble there is because the concept of angel is both sensible but intangible, so it can be infinite and none, and it can be one or the other. We've gone beyond the limits of our reason, and the fact that we can generate two conclusions which contradict each other, and Kant does this in the first critique with the ideas of God, with the idea of infinity, and he shows how we can generate completely opposite understandings of the same object, it's because there is no intuition given to us. Okay, reason is not constrained. It goes beyond its own limits. The form of a critique gives us the limits of our reason, so we know what we can't speak of. We can't speak of the essence of God, if you like. We can't speak of the essence of angels because there are no intuitions given to us that constrain our reasoning. In the first critique of pure reason, free will was also one of these ideas. He did an antinomy where we are both free as human agents, but also determined by the causal world. And he said these were both understandings, and they were possible. In the groundwork of the metaphysics of morality, he says, look, we must assume we are free to do morality. Okay, so a bit like we must assume these categories to understand what animals exist, but that doesn't yet tell us whether there's such things as unicorns or horses in the world. We have to wait for the intuitions to give us that experience. He says in the groundwork, we must assume we are free, because if we're not free agents, then to say he is blamed for that, he deserves credit for that, implies they could have acted otherwise, that they are responsible for their actions. Therefore, we couldn't, make these judgments unless we assumed we are free. But he's consistent with the first critique and never really says that there is anything in the world, such as a free will, that actually exists. The possibility of this form of transcendental freedom, okay, in the first critique, in the critique of pure reason, is the subject of an antinomy. We can be both free, but we can also be determined by nature. And we can't decide what it is. In order to do morality, we must assume that we have free actions. Okay. But in the second critique, i.e. the one we're reading, something interesting happens. In order to make any judgment, any spontaneous judgment of reason, and it's dependent on my will, relies on a free will. Okay. I govern myself, and I'm responsible for rational thought. Hence the difference between the laws of a nature to which the will is subject and of a nature which is subject to a will. Now, the laws of nature to which a will is subject is we all seek self-preservation. We are all egoists. Human beings will do whatever maximizes their pleasure. All of those are laws of nature applied to a will of subject. The second, the latter one, and of a nature which is subject to a will, is the idea that we impose reason on the world, which is his idealism, as far as the relation to the will to its free actions is concerned. Now, he puts a constraint there, but it doesn't this. And he says it rests on this difference between these two. The former, i.e. the naturalism, that in the former, the objects must be the causes of the representations that determine the will. Okay, so we're caused by the world, we're determined. Whereas in the latter, the will is to be the cause of the objects. And that's pure reason. We impose reason on the world and therefore spontaneously form judgments. And it's active reason that is creating the possibility for judgments. So that its causality has its determining ground. What is the origin? What is the origin of this? In the pure faculty of reason. And can therefore also be called a pure practical reason. What he's saying is the fact that we can form judgments and the fact that we have knowledge at all, the fact that we are rational, involves the spontaneous use of reason. If we have the spontaneous use of reason, that is, to a large extent, freedom. It's autonomy. It is the imposition of categories and concepts on reality and intuitions, on the given. He continues in the critique, in a slightly sort of 10 pages on, the objective reality of a pure will, or what is the same thing of a pure practical reason, is given a priori in the moral law, as it were by fact. For so we may call a determination of the will that is unavoidable, even though it does not rest upon empirical principles. Okay, so we have a determination of the will that is unavoidable, cannot be stopped, is necessary, and it doesn't rest on empirical principles. It doesn't rest on any sort of scientific description of an object. In the concept of a will, however, the concept of causality is already contained. And thus in the concept of a pure will there is contained the concept of a causality with freedom. That is a causality that is not determinable in accordance with laws of nature, and hence not capable of any empirical intuition as proof of its reality, but that nevertheless perfectly justifies its objective reality a priori in the pure practical law, though not, as is easily seen, with a view to the theoretical use of reason, but only to its practical use. Again, there's the condition which he's put in, a sort of caveat. Now, the concept of a being that has free will is the concept of a causa noumenon, and one is already assured that this concept does not contradict itself, since the concept of a cause, as having risen wholly from the pure understanding, also has its objective reality with respect to objects in general, assured by the deduction, inasmuch as, being in its origin independent of all sensible conditions, and so of itself not restricted to phenomenon, unless one should want to make a determined theoretical use of it, the concept could certainly be applied to things as being of the pure understanding. Read that quotation through several times because it's difficult. Okay, I'm not going to lie about that. But what's he up to here? In order to be rational, to speculate, to form judgment, it requires spontaneity. That is the performance of choosing the form of one's statements or assertions. Okay, intuitions are given, reason is imposed on them, cognition occurs. Autonomy is the principle of morality by which reason determines the will. Okay, reason determines peculiarizations because the laws of logic determine how we can use objects together, what their limits are through dialectic, and then autonomy is the principle of morality by which reason determines the will. Kant sort of compares autonomy to space and time, those pure intuitions which determine or constrain the natural order. Now let me take time here. An object appears in time, okay, so it seems to be given in time. It's an intuition. But time is imposed on reality because without time we couldn't have an experience of an object at all. So time is a priori, i.e. comes from reason, because it is imposed on experience and not given by experience. It makes possible synthetic a priori judgments of coexistence. So, for example, I'm alive at the same time as you're alive. We can only make that judgment if we have an idea of what time is and structured. So reason puts it on reality. However, time is also an intuition. Okay? It's a given to our experience and not imposed on experience, because time is infinite. Okay, because no matter what time we think about, there's a before and an after, and no idea can be infinite. We know that from the antinomies. So autonomy, which is similar to time in practical reason, is an idea imposed on rational action. Okay, it's otherwise we could not form moral judgments. We could not blame and credit people or say you should not have done that, you should have done that, unless we assume, okay, and this is it, we assume, we treat agents as if they are free, just as we treat objects as if they are in time. So it seems a priori, it comes from us. Okay, now the trouble with a priori concepts and categories is that we can't attest to their reality. We can't prove they exist. Their ideas can't be proven. They will involve us in contradiction. Okay. Yeah, autonomy also belongs to the empirical world. There is a fact of autonomy, according to Kant, because of the very real experience of the conflict between desire and will. Since reason is spontaneously imposed on the objects of cognition, i.e. the things we experience, it is also subject to this pure practical reason. It's a doing, a performance, a production. But since the moral will is also constrained by the needs and inclinations of an actually existent agent, remember that we're a pure but not a holy will. Okay, we can form the law, but that law does not, by its formation, necessitate us obeying it. Otherwise, we would be robots. And if it did, then we wouldn't have blame or credit for our actions. Okay, an angel is not a moral agent. A god is not exactly a moral agent, because they just obey the moral law. They cannot but obey the moral law. Morality arises because of the intuition that we could not obey it, that we could have acted otherwise. So the moral law is affirmed, and our autonomy is affirmed by the fact that we should do what we do. And that fact of experience is a testimony to the intuitive or the intuition level of autonomy.